Let's be honest. When someone breaks you, shatters your trust, wounds your soul, every cell in your body aches for justice. You replay the betrayal. You rehearse what you should have said. And deep down, you wonder if they'll ever regret it. If they'll ever come back, not with excuses, but with the kind of remorse that finally makes things feel fair. Revenge promises relief, but it delivers residue, keeps you tethered to the very pain you're trying to escape. Healing, though, healing's rebellion, healing's where real power lives. Because when someone hurts you, what they truly expect is for you to fall apart, to shrink, to question your worth. They want their harm to echo inside you so loudly that you begin to echo it yourself. That's how pain perpetuates. It feeds off your reaction. But when you choose to heal, you interrupt the cycle. You stop being a reflection of their damage and start becoming a reflection of your resilience. Healing doesn't always look brave from the outside. Sometimes it looks like crying through the night instead of texting back. Sometimes it's choosing silence over defense, walking away instead of staying to win the last word, turning inward when everything in you wants to scream outward. That quiet, steady process, grieving, confronting, learning, letting go, is how you reassemble the pieces they tried to scatter. And here's what people don't talk about enough. Healing isn't passive. It takes ferocious courage. It takes choosing peace over performance. It takes breaking your own patterns, not just avoiding theirs. It's an act of spiritual defiance. You're saying, I won't let what happened to me define what becomes of me. The most powerful version of you is not the one who plots a comeback to prove something. It's the version of you who no longer needs to, because your joy is no longer up for negotiation. Your peace is no longer dependent on their apology. Your future is no longer stuck in the memory of their failure. Healing is the final word. Healing is the real power move. And no one sees it coming, especially those who thought they broke you. There comes a point after the tears, after the silence, after the long nights of trying to make sense of it all, when you realize the story doesn't end with how they left, how they lied, or how they broke you. That's just the middle, the turning point, the comma, not the period. You rewrite the narrative the moment you decide to rise. Because rising doesn't mean you're pretending it didn't happen. Rising means it happened and you're still here, still breathing, still building, still believing in the possibility of something better than what they offered. You see, people who hurt you often count on you staying stuck. They write you into a story where you're the victim they left behind, the shattered one who never quite recovers. That's how they preserve their version of events, one that doesn't hold them accountable. But the moment you take your pain and begin turning it into purpose, you take the pen back. You stop rereading the chapter they wrote in ink and you begin drafting the one that heals in gold. Rising doesn't require an audience. In fact, the most profound rises often happen in private. When you decide to stop texting someone who never showed up for you, when you choose therapy instead of revenge, when you build a life so honest and aligned that you don't even recognize the person who once begged for their validation, that's how the story changes. Not when they apologize, not when they explain, and not even when they come back. The story changes when you change. And make no mistake, this rising is sacred work. It's you choosing dignity over desperation, self-trust over second chances, It's you stepping out of the role they cast for you and becoming the author of your own healing. Let them tell whatever version of the story helps them sleep. You don't need to defend the truth. Just live it. Your wholeness, your growth, your refusal to settle for less that becomes the plot twist they never expected. Because when you rise, you don't just rewrite the story for yourself. You inspire others to rewrite theirs. One of the most uncomfortable truths for those who've caused harm is this: when you grow, they see everything they refuse to become. You may never say a word to them again. You may never confront them, block them, or call them out. But your evolution, the way you rise, the way you soften into strength instead of hardening in bitterness, it shows them exactly what they lost, and more painfully, what they never had the courage to become themselves. Because growth isn't just about moving forward. It's about shedding what no longer fits. And often that means shedding the people who once felt like home. Your healing, your self-respect, your peace, they all become a mirror. And for the one who hurt you, that mirror is a confrontation they never asked for. Suddenly, they can't use the old excuses. They can't pretend you were the problem. They can't convince themselves you were too much, too sensitive, too needy, because the healed version of you no longer plays that role. And that terrifies them. See, when someone breaks you, they usually do it from a place of brokenness themselves, but instead of facing their own wounds, they project them, they manipulate, they belittle, they run. They want to stay small, and your growth threatens that. Your ability to choose a better life, one filled with boundaries, truth, and integrity, exposes their emotional laziness. And even if they don't say it out loud, they feel it. They feel it when you no longer respond to their bait. They feel it when they see you glowing in your own peace. They feel it when you no longer need their validation, their drama, or their chaos to feel alive. That's the power of growth. It doesn't scream. It simply shines. You become undeniable. And here's the thing. You didn't grow to prove anything. You didn't rise to get revenge. You grew because you were tired of living in the shadows of who they needed you to be. You stopped betraying yourself for connection. You chose to heal for you. And in doing so, you held up a mirror, not to shame them, but to set yourself free. If they're wise, they'll look into that mirror and do their own work. If they're not, they'll keep running from it, from themselves, from the truth. But either way, you've already won, because your growth stopped being about them the moment it started honoring you. Closure is one of the most misunderstood concepts when it comes to healing from betrayal, abandonment, or emotional harm. We're taught to believe it's something we get from another person, a conversation, an apology, an explanation that finally makes the pain make sense. But what if I told you that real closure doesn't come from them at all? Because dignity doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't circle the same emotional grave waiting for life. When someone hurts you and walks away without taking responsibility, the ache they leave behind feels like a cliffhanger. You sit there wondering, don't they care? Don't they see what they did? Don't they owe me something? And the truth is, maybe they do, but they're not capable of giving it. Or worse, they don't want to. That's where dignity comes in. Dignity is what keeps you from chasing someone who already showed you their exit. It's what whispers, you don't need more words, you need more peace. It's what anchors you when your ego wants to knock on the door of someone who already closed it. When you choose dignity, you don't deny your pain. You hold it gently. You say, yes, that hurt. Yes, I didn't deserve that. And no, I'm not going to keep shrinking myself, begging for an explanation that still won't make it right. Here's what most people don't realize. Closure isn't a conversation, it's a decision. It's the moment you stop needing their side of the story to validate yours. It's realizing their silence is a statement, their refusal to grow is an answer. Their inability to say, I'm sorry, doesn't mean you aren't worthy of one, it means they aren't ready to face themselves. And that's not your burden to carry. You don't have to forgive them to move on. You don't have to understand them to outgrow them. You don't need a final talk, a last look, or a text that says you were right. What you need is to reclaim your energy, to honor your boundaries, to look in the mirror and say, I'm done bleeding for people who never tried to stop the wound. That is closure, and it doesn't come from their mouth. It comes from your decision to protect your dignity like your life depends on it, because emotionally it often does. When you stop chasing closure and start choosing yourself, you send a powerful message to the world and to your own heart. I may not have gotten what I deserved from them, but I will give it to myself. But that's not weakness. That's grace and armor. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from being silenced. It comes from rising, from rebuilding, from choosing to live so fully, so freely, that you no longer need to explain your absence, your peace, or your power. That kind of silence, it's thunder in disguise. When someone has hurt you, betrayed your trust, minimized your worth, treated your heart like a place they could visit without care, they expect a reaction. They expect noise. They expect you to protest, to chase, to scream into the void they left behind. Because if you're still trying to get their attention, they still hold some control. But when you go quiet, not out of defeat, but out of deep alignment with your healing, that silence becomes deafening to those who expected to keep you small. Because in that silence, you're not just recovering, you're thriving. And thriving doesn't mean posting a curated life online to prove a point. It means living a life that feels so good to you on the inside, you forget to make announcements on the outside. Thriving is emotional independence. It's spiritual sobriety. It's waking up and realizing you're no longer waiting for closure, validation, or recognition. It's building relationships that mirror your growth, not your wounds. It's laughing again and meaning it. It's choosing peace over performance, fulfillment over revenge, joy over justification. And here's the thing. When you thrive after someone tried to break you, they notice. Even if they say nothing, even if they pretend not to watch, even if they rewrite the story to make themselves feel better, your thriving speaks for itself. It whispers to them everything you'll never need to say. I outgrew your chaos. I refused to carry your shame. I stopped explaining my value. I let go. I healed. And that silence, that kind of unapologetic thriving, it echoes louder than any confrontation ever could. Because people who damage others rarely expect their victims to flourish. They expect fragments. They expect weakness. They expect you to be defined by what they did to you. But when you become whole without their help, when you transform instead of retaliate, you interrupt their narrative. You remind them, without a word, that what they tried to break only got stronger. That they didn't end your story, they just exited early. And the rest, you wrote it in bold, with grace, with boundaries, with love. So don't explain your peace. Don't justify your joy. Don't water yourself down for people who refuse to nourish you. Just live, just thrive, and let that silence speak volumes. There is a moment in healing that no one prepares you for. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's a quiet shift, a gentle, steady awakening when you look at the person who once held your heart and realize you've outgrown them, not because you stopped loving them, not because the memories didn't matter, but because you finally started loving yourself more. Loving yourself enough to outgrow them isn't an act of bitterness, it's an act of self-honor. It means you no longer shape yourself to fit into the corners of someone else's comfort. It means you stop accepting crumbs when you know you were built for the table. It means you recognize that the version of you who tolerated their neglect, their manipulation, their indifference, she was just trying to survive. But you're learning to thrive. And outgrowing them doesn't mean you hate them. It just means you see things clearly now. You see how they needed you broken to feel powerful, how they fed on your insecurities to mask their own, how they confused love with control, connection with convenience, and vulnerability with weakness. You stayed soft, you stayed kind, and then one day you stayed gone. That's what loving yourself does. It gives you permission to walk away, not because you're angry, but because you're finally at peace. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop rehearsing old conversations in your head. You stop hoping they'll wake up one day and realize what they lost. Because the truth is, you realized what you were worth. And once you do that, once you fully understand that your value was never dependent on their ability to see it, you start choosing differently. You choose people who meet you in truth, not illusion. You choose peace over potential. You choose respect over chemistry. And most importantly, you choose yourself. Here's the beautiful irony. When you outgrow someone, they often try to shrink you back into the version of yourself that tolerated them, but it won't work anymore. You've tasted freedom. You've built a life from your own roots. You've grieved, healed, evolved, and now you're unreachable in the best way. Because this kind of self-love isn't about affirmations and mirror pep talks. It's about decisions. It's about who you allow access to your time, your body, your energy, your dreams. It's about who gets to stay and who no longer qualifies. And while they may come back one day apologizing, reminiscing, wanting to rewrite history, by then your heart will have moved on. Not because you're cold, but because you're whole. You didn't just move on. You rose up. And you did it not to show them anything, but to show yourself what was always true. You were never hard to love. They were just too limited to offer it. So love yourself enough to walk away. Love yourself enough to never look back. Love yourself enough to keep growing, even if it means growing past them. Because the most powerful kind of healing doesn't beg for a second chance. It blesses the past and chooses the future with grace. So if you've ever been hurt, abandoned, betrayed, or made to feel like your pain didn't matter, let this be your reminder. You don't need revenge to be powerful. You need truth. You need healing. You need you. You don't have to wait for them to realize your worth. You don't have to sit in emotional purgatory hoping they circle back with closure. You don't need to clap back, expose, or prove a thing. The best revenge is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not about getting even. It's about getting free. It's waking up one day and realizing you haven't thought about them in weeks. It's watching yourself set boundaries without guilt. It's no longer shrinking to make others feel big. It's building a life that doesn't apologize for being whole. And if when you do all this, there's a chance they'll return, not because they've changed, but because they'll feel the absence of your light. They'll see your growth, and they'll remember who you were when you were still trying to be loved by them. But by then, you'll be far beyond their reach, not in distance, but in depth. Not out of spite, but because your soul has moved into a space they never had the tools to enter. Let them beg, let them regret, let them watch the version of you they were too blind to cherish. But you don't stop, you don't shrink, you don't settle. You rise, you heal. You thrive. And that quiet, steady, unapologetic becoming is the best revenge of all.